Welcome back to Boilers and Beyond. I'm Jordan Jones. Purdue is on bye this week, but there is still plenty to talk about in the world of college football, and more specifically, Purdue football. I rewatched the win over Indiana State and came away with a few new thoughts. How did the rule changes in college football fare in week one? Did my opinion change of some other Big Ten teams? And I'll answer some of your early questions about the Fighting Irish of Notre Dame. We'll discuss it all here on the show today. Looking forward to it. If you don't already, be sure to follow the show on Twitter at Boilers Beyond. There's always lots to talk about during the playing portion of the season. Come join the conversation there and send in your questions about Notre Dame. I'll be tackling those in next week's preview of the matchup. And if you don't already, be sure to subscribe wherever you get your podcasts so that you don't miss a thing. You can also email your questions, boilersandbeyondpod@gmail.com. Always good to hear from many of you on the email line. I'll start off here with some thoughts from rewatching Purdue's win over Indiana State. It's nice to have a 3-day weekend. It gives me a little extra time to do that. Not a whole lot going on Monday, so I was able to rewatch the game. Look, the general thoughts don't change. I mean, that game was what it was. It doesn't take much football intellect to see that Purdue is just the vastly superior team, and that Purdue did what any reasonable person would expect Purdue to do in that game. Some individual takeaways. Watching the defensive line, I thought Jeffrey M'ba and DeMar'Jay Lewis were the two who made their presence felt the most. That's not to say they were the only two. I certainly saw Brevard on that first series blow up a play. There was a series in the second half where I think Amanade was in the backfield on 3 straight plays. But I liked what Jeffrey M'ba and DeMar'Jay Lewis did. Both of those guys, very different situations. DeMar'Jay Lewis has been hurt for basically 2 years now. He's finally healthy, had a nice showing. And with Jeffrey M'ba, he came in from Auburn with some good hype. He did not have a big year last year. He struggled to get on the field a ton, but he's off to a good start this season. Those are really encouraging signs. Again, you got to see it against a better opponent, because Indiana State's offensive line was very overwhelmed. That's by far the worst offensive line Purdue will see all year, but nonetheless, those two stood out to me. I thought both of Purdue's tight ends did a pretty nice job blocking at times, especially on the outside. Some of those screen passes early on, Purdue, I think it was the first 2 plays of the game, a screen pass out to Jamal Edrin where Max Clare's a lead blocker on that. He did a nice job. There were a couple other plays in the game where Max Clare was very noticeable, blocking downfield in the pass game. Drew Bibber as well had some nice moments as a blocker. So I think you like what you see there, because that's a really important thing that often gets overlooked. But that's how you take those, 5-yard screens and turn those into a 15, 20-yard screen. It's really important. One thing I did note, Botros Alessandro had that pass breakup there on the east sideline going to the south end zone. In hindsight, I think that might have been pass interference. I thought he got there a little bit early. He certainly never turned his head. I don't love the rule, the classic ball's underthrown, so the defender gets called for pass interference, but that gets called all the time across college football. I'm surprised it didn't get called there. It's something that will get called throughout the season. Maccabee had that 37-yard run. Jalen Grant and Gus Hartwig had really nice blocks on that. A nicely schemed play, too. Graham Harrell had I thought he called a really nice game. Again, overmatched opponent. I know. I don't want to come across as too over the moon in my too effusive of my praise of Purdue here, but I think Purdue took some very noticeable steps from last year to this, even against an overmatched opponent. The proof will be in the pudding moving on, but a very good start. That drive late in the first half where Purdue is just kind of hijacked by penalties, very much so on Josh Sales, probably not so much on Bakine Coley on the second one. But what matters the most from that in a game where Purdue won 49-0, both of those deep balls, one to Jamal Adrine, one to Max Clare, were called back, but both were completed and both were well thrown. Both were in a really good spot. The one to Adrine especially. Very nice balls on those by Hudson Card. He had a really good day pushing the ball downfield. He had the touchdown to Leland Smith. He had those two deep balls that were caught and called back. The one incompletion he had all day was the one where he just missed Jamal Adrine. And in hindsight, he overshot him by a yard or two. It was really close. He had a good, long intermediate throw, I guess. Probably a 20-yard throw down the field to Leland Smith. He had a good day. He had a really good day. Nitpicky, but the end of the first half defense by Purdue wasn't great. Purdue brought 6 on a play and allowed a 20-yard run to Elijah Owens. And then a play or two later, there was the overthrown touchdown pass where Antonio Stevens got beat. A good throw would have been a touchdown there. It wouldn't have mattered in the grand scheme of things, but Purdue got really fortunate that drive resulted in 0 points because they had the touchdown pass that they couldn't cash in on, and then the field goal from 45 yards missed. In a perfect world, you might have wanted to get a little bit more from Keelan Crimmins. Only 2 punts on the day. His first one was not exactly great. It's almost a backwards way of thinking because, well, of course you don't want to see your punter. You're playing Indiana State. You shouldn't need him. But you're going into Notre Dame. You probably want to know what you have, want to have a decent feel for what your punter can do in a game setting before you go into that game. Oh, well. And I was a little surprised that we didn't see any of Marcos Davila. I wonder in hindsight, had Purdue cashed in on the drive where Drew Bibber fumbled in the first half, maybe it's 28-0 going to the locker room, and then you come out and score right away and it's 35-0. Does that give you another drive or two on offense where you're taking Hudson Card out of the game and putting in backups to where you might see Davila? Again, really nitpicky stuff here, but I think in general, the audience of this podcast is probably into the more nitpicky stuff. If not, let me know. But, it was a close battle by all accounts between Ryan Brown and Davila for that backup quarterback spot during fall camp. I'd like to see what Davila can do, and I don't know when Purdue will get another chance to play backups. When you look at the schedule, there's not another game that projects to be a blowout win. I know Northwestern doesn't look great. I know Purdue fans always, view Indiana as that type of a game. But from a point spread situation, there's not going to be another game like that. So I do wish you could have seen Davila a little bit just to see what he could do when those lights come on. But those are a few final thoughts there from the win over Indiana State. Purdue's 1-0. Purdue has the bye week this week, which, it's interesting. It's weird. Again, this isn't Purdue's fault. I know most of you listen, to most episodes, but this all happened because the Big Ten schedule changed when they added the 4 West Coast teams. Purdue was originally scheduled to play at Illinois on Saturday, August 31st. And then Indiana State would have been this weekend, Notre Dame, Oregon State into Big Ten play. I don't know when the byes were scheduled, but when the West Coast schools were added, Purdue had to redo the schedule because that season opening date was no longer going to be a Big Ten game. So Purdue had to shove Indiana State up a week. I think Purdue gave them a little bit of money to do so and kind of eat the week 2 bye. It's better than a week 1 bye, but it's still not ideal. Where it is ideal for Purdue, though, is the prospects of getting Nyland Green and C.J. Smith back for the Notre Dame game. You want all hands on deck for that. Ryan Walters did say that Corey Stewart, Joe Anderson, and Cam Brown would be good to go for the Notre Dame game. He did not have a commitment on Green and C.J. Smith yet. Those guys were hurt fairly early in training camp, week 2 maybe week 3. So you get a little more time to rest them up. You get another week of scouting for Notre Dame. But, you do kind of lose the advantage that the 2 bye week season provides you, where, now you're playing 11 games in 12 weeks. It's basically a normal season. Instead of, maybe you play 4, have a bye, play 4, have a bye, play 4, or something of that nature. It is what it is, though. I wanted to talk a little bit about some of the rule changes we saw across college football for this season. 2 of them are very big. Now, the one I'm not going to talk about much is the tablets on the sidelines, because I'm not acquainted enough with that technology to understand how big of a difference that makes. Obviously, you're able to watch film in real time. A quarterback comes off the field and he can watch his throws from the past drive. The defense can do the same. I don't know how drastic of a change that is. Maybe I'm wrong. But the helmet communication is a major shift. And look, it didn't make a big difference in this Purdue game. Indiana State didn't use it, to my knowledge. FCS teams can't use it in FCS games. They're able to use it when they play an FBS team if they want to pay for it. Just based off the effort we saw from Indiana State on Saturday, I'm guessing they're not paying for helmet communication. Who knows? I didn't notice a big difference, though. Purdue did go fairly up-tempo in that game. It wasn't a situation where Purdue was clearly bleeding the clock, trying to get that play in and trying to milk the directions from Graham Harrell in Hudson Card's helmets, per se. Purdue was kind of going out there and playing. There seemed to be a lot of tech issues, though, early on, which is probably to be expected. Ryan Walters indicated that Purdue did have some technological issues there. In that game in Ireland in week 0, Georgia Tech's went out entirely. The Alabama game was delayed a few minutes because the helmet comms weren't working, and then they couldn't use it altogether. One thing to note, if this happens in a game where one team's helmet comms go out, the other team can no longer use it to play on a level playing field. So the other thing, for Purdue, you had a home crowd, not exactly the loudest game in the world when you're just dominating and bludgeoning an opponent. When you're in a hostile environment or a really loud atmosphere, how does that work? Some early feedback is mixed on the helmet communication volume, but when you go to Lincoln, Nebraska, or you don't go to Lincoln this year, you go to Camp Randall, you go to Ohio Stadium. How is it in games like that? I'm curious to see what that looks like. And then as well with tempo, are teams going slower? How much information can the OC really get to the quarterback before the play clock hits 15? I don't know. Does it help eliminate mistakes? I don't know. The other rule change this year is the 2-minute timeout. And I'll be honest with you, by the time we got to the 2-minute timeout in the fourth quarter of the Purdue versus Indiana State game, I was ready for that game to be over. So I could, get out of Ross-Ade, listen to the post-game press conferences, and get on my way back home to watch some other games and start putting the podcast together. I don't like the 2-minute warning in the NFL and I know we have to call it the 2-minute timeout in college because the NFL has a trademark on 2-minute warning, the way it has a trademark on everything. But I don't, other than giving TV a commercial break, there is no purpose for a 2-minute warning. I don't like it at all. I think it lets coaches be less responsible with timeouts, which I'm not interested in. I've watched enough of the Matt Nagy Bears to value timeouts a little bit. It slows down the game. You're taking some excitement out of the last minutes. Like I don't know. Yes, in one sense, you do put another timeout in there, so it could help the losing team. But also, if a team's driving and you're just on the edge of your seat, then you have a 2-minute and 30-second commercial break to fall back in your recliner. And I don't know. It is what it is. Not something I'm going to get all bent out of shape over, but in general, things that make college football more like the NFL, I'm against. I don't mind the NFL. I love the Chicago Bears. I am looking forward to watching the Chiefs game tomorrow night and the Packers game on Friday. But I do not need college football to mirror the NFL. I have the NFL for the NFL. I have college football to be college football. And then finally, before Q&A, one last thing from week 1. Recorded the post-game show on Sunday morning. Southern Cal looked really, really good in their win over LSU on Sunday night in Las Vegas. Brian Kelly teams tend to have pretty high floors. The bottom does not tend to fall out on Brian Kelly's teams. I know I'm speaking to a tough audience here because most Purdue fans aren't Brian Kelly fans. I don't think there are a lot of Brian Kelly fans of just, him as a guy or him as a coach out there. But his teams rarely just suck. So to go out there and beat a pretty decent LSU team, that's a big win. And it looked like Southern Cal belonged. The narrative had been, and the truth had been, that their defense was just so pathetically bad. That wasn't the case. It wasn't great. It wasn't the steel curtain, but it was good enough. It was bend, don't break. LSU got in the red zone 3 times and scored 6 points. But Southern Cal looks better than I thought. They could be more ready to compete towards the top of the Big Ten than I initially expected. After the break, going to get into the Q&A here. Got a lot of great questions. Looking forward to that. First, September means a lot of things. The return of football season, pumpkin-scented candles, leaves beginning to fall, and the weather starting to turn. It's also Life Insurance Awareness Month. As an agent with Indiana Farm Bureau Insurance, my biggest passion is ensuring that my clients have the proper amounts and proper types of life insurance. Give me a call at 317-846-5861 or email me at jordan.jones@infarmbureau.com, and let's make sure your family and your world are properly protected. First question I got was a dominant performance over Indiana State a result of Indiana State being that bad or Purdue being good? A shutout of any kind isn't easy versus any opponent. I mean, I think more than anything, it's a reflection of a pretty bad FCS team playing a Big Ten opponent. I think everyone in the Big Ten would steamroll Indiana State for the most part. At UCLA, Northwestern, I don't know. But, keep in mind, Indiana State went to Indiana last year and got steamrolled. And Indiana didn't exactly have a great year. So, outside of the last drive of the first half that we talked about, Indiana State never even threatened to score on Purdue. I think that was the only time Indiana State crossed the 50 all day. It's not a good team. Now, Purdue looked improved. You've got to be happy with what you saw from Purdue. And you're right that a shutout isn't easy. Purdue nearly lost it on that 2-minute drive. But, yeah, I mean, I think it says more about Indiana State being bad than it does Purdue being great. We're going to find out a lot about Purdue here in the next 2 games. I think you're going to find out most of what you need to know about Purdue before Big Ten play starts. After seeing Wisconsin and Oregon play less than dominating performances, do you feel more confident now that upsets for Purdue in those games are not as far-fetched as you might have thought before? With Wisconsin, I absolutely do. I agree with that wholeheartedly. I did not love what I saw from Wisconsin last season. I know it played very well against Purdue, but it also lost to Northwestern and Indiana. That's not great. It lost to Iowa, which everyone lost to Iowa, but Wisconsin prides itself on being the better team in those kind of same styles of play, and it wasn't. Tyler Van Dyke doesn't excite me as a quarterback. Nothing about his time at Miami excited me. Wisconsin did not recruit exceptionally well during the end of the Paul Chryst era. That's kind of why he's not their coach anymore. So I don't know how great of a roster this really is. When they fired Chryst, it was a declaration that they wanted bigger and better than what they'd had in Madison for 30 years. Is that going to backfire? We'll see. We've seen it happen. Look at Florida right now. Dan Mullen was giving them pretty good results, and they fired him because he wasn't going to win national titles. Wisconsin was getting pretty good results. They move on from Chryst because they wasn't good enough. We'll see what's going to happen with Luke Fickell. That's one of those where the hire makes all the sense in the world, and everyone thinks it's going to work out. Let's see if that comes to fruition. With Oregon, I'm not quite there yet. They only beat Idaho 24-14, and that raised a lot of eyebrows. But Oregon did outgain Idaho 487-217. That's a pretty dominant performance. Gabriel went 41 for 49 for 380. Kind of crazy that you can do that and only score 24 points. It seemed like a game, though, where the box score and the final score didn't exactly match. I really like Dan Lanning. I like Oregon's program, and I'm very interested to see what they do with Boise this weekend. A good group of 5 team, but a group of 5 team nonetheless. And kind of on the same note, did the results around the Big Ten make you think that Purdue can win more games than previously expected? Kind of. The problem is the teams that I was the most surprised by in a negative way in week 1, for the most part, Purdue doesn't play. Like UCLA looked terrible, but Purdue doesn't play UCLA. Minnesota looked abysmal. Purdue doesn't play Minnesota. I don't think Purdue could beat Michigan still. I think there's a physicality level there that I don't know if Purdue's ready for. But Michigan, underwhelmed. Purdue does get Northwestern, who I don't love. So, Nebraska looked good. Illinois did what Purdue did. They dominated an FCS team. Big one for them this week. Northwestern does not excite me at all. I'm low on Northwestern. Ohio State and Penn State, good starts. Penn State looks better than expected. I would feel worse about that game for Purdue after what I saw from Penn State in week 1. Andy Kotelnicki was a great offensive coordinator hire through one game. Michigan State did not impress me at all. I thought Aiden Childs was going to be a lot more ready to go for week 1. He didn't look great, but there's a long way to go. I didn't see much of Indiana, but Indiana cruised to a win in Curt Cignetti's debut. So, I don't know. I certainly don't feel worse about Purdue than I did coming into the week in terms of Purdue's schedule. Let's see some more data points. Let's revisit this before Big Ten play really gets going. Did anything surprise you about what Purdue did on Saturday personnel, play calling, etc. I don't know that I expected Purdue to come out in 12 personnel, but that's what Purdue did. Claire and Bibber were both on the field for the first couple of plays. I'd wondered aloud in podcasts before if Purdue would use some 12 personnel this year. Sure enough, it did right away. Devin Mockabee and Reggie Love, about an even split in snap count. I think it was like 25 to 22. Interested to see this moving forward. That's a pretty nice tandem. We know what Devin Mockabee can do. He is going to go down as one of the better running backs in Purdue history. Love looked good. He looked good. That's a nice tandem. If something happens, who comes off the bench first? Jaheim Merriweather or Elijah Jackson? I'm curious to know the answer to that. But the snap count was interesting because I'd wondered about that. Would it be 70-30, 60-40? Maybe it's going to be closer to 50-50. I use PFF data for snap counts. It's not always 100% reliable, but Shamar Rigby leading the receivers in snap counts definitely stood out to me. There was some pretty good rotation. I'd been asked about that a few weeks back. A lot of receivers got on the field. You saw, the three starters. You saw Leland Smith. You saw Denylon Morissette, Andrew Sawinski. Armad Branch caught a pass. Did Jesse Watson catch a pass, maybe? There were a number of guys who caught passes. Now, you emptied the bench a little more than normal, but nonetheless, some good rotation there. And then it just felt very air raid scheme stuff, which it's supposed to. The quick outs, the quick screens to Jamal Adrine, the fake handoff, two-step rollout where you throw a little dump off to the tight end. The quick outs, that stuff is very air raid. And then it sets up those shots where you throw one downfield to Adrine, to Max Clare, to Leland Smith. That's air raid stuff. I thought it looked a little more fluid of an offense. Yeah. How much improvement in this receiving room compared to last year? 96% completion for Card. Receivers were sure-handed. No unnecessary drop passes. The question points out that Garrett Miller had a drop pass in the Nebraska game last year that was a drive killer. How assuring was it that the receivers were not dropping passes? Yeah, I think the receiving room looks improved so far. Look, last year, that receiver room was thin. TJ Sheffield never really took the next step. He had some good moments at Purdue. It would be naive to say otherwise. He had a really good game against Nebraska in 2022, which comes to mind. I feel like he had some catches in that win over Iowa in 21 up there. But holistically, he never took the next step. That's why he's at UConn now. Abdur-Rahman Yassin had too many injuries. It's not his fault. He just had a lot of injuries and became pretty limited. That's why he's at South Florida now. Deion Burks is a good player. Don't get me wrong there. There's kind of become this alternate reality on social media and on message boards where Burks and Nick Scorton aren't that good. Those guys are big losses. Those guys are good players, and that's okay to say. I don't know that he's like a Rondale Moore type of difference maker. Some of the early buzz on him out of Norman was sky high, and I don't know that I quite saw that. But Burks was a good player, but he was all you had, and you're playing him outside because you have nothing else out there. It's an improved group, and as far as the drop passes go, Drew Bibber dropped one from Ryan Brown. But no, as a whole, Purdue's receivers were good. Good start. Big adjustment next week against an elite secondary, but a good start. Did we see the air raid offense that we expected to see because of the personnel at wide receiver? Look, it should be more of what he wants. Almost all of these receivers have come to Purdue under this staff. Jerron Tibbs kind of didn't, but he's got that big body, athletic frame. Andrew Sawinski was a holdover, but unless I'm forgetting anyone, that's it. This is a receiving room that is all guys who came to play for Ryan Walters. So that's kind of the intriguing part of all of this, is that in a previous era of college football, 10 years ago, you can't flip a roster like this. You're waiting for year 3, year 4 to be able to say, all right, now coach has his guys. The old classic saying, a coach has underachieved for 2 years. Well, now he has his guys. Well, this is almost all Ryan Walters' guys. It's less than 20 players who played a game for Brom. It's Ryan Walters' roster. What is the ratio of bad calls versus poor execution on the offensive penalties on the couple of drives which were stalled by moving backwards? In general, the drive that was hijacked, one on Josh Sales was legit. Wasn't sure about the one on Bekine Coley. And then I think there was a false start in there that, I don't know. It's hard to complain about false starts. Those are usually right. The two late on Luke Griffin both looked pretty legit to me. Denial on Morissette getting a late hit while on offense, not ideal. And that one was legit. He smoked a guy as the play was done. So I don't know. The roughing the passer one on Sheeta Soleil I didn't like, and there was one on Botros Alessandro that probably should have been called for PI. In general, it is hard to do this because I'm sure, it's holding. There are plenty of holds that were probably missed. All in all, it was fine. The officiating wasn't anything egregious in my book, but I'm not a blame the refs guy either. I've umpired way too much baseball to be that guy. Card looks top 3 in the Big Ten good, but do we know how good? Well, let's see it against a good defense. We know what Dylan Gabriel's capable of. He's a very good quarterback. Drew Aller looked awfully good on Saturday. Miller Moss looked awfully good for Southern Cal. Dylan Raiola looked pretty good for Nebraska against an overmatched opponent. There are some good players in this league. So I think it's early to say top 3 in the Big Ten. But when you look at his last 3 games, he's been very good. The Minnesota game, the Indiana game, now the Indiana State game. It's a big opportunity for him against Notre Dame. That's a very good defense. We're going to start getting into some Notre Dame questions here with this next one, but that's going to be possibly the best defense he's faced at Purdue so far. All right, got some Notre Dame questions here. I don't want to go too deep into Notre Dame yet. That's what next week's show is for. But these are a little bit more big picture things. What kind of offense gave trouble to them last year? He points out that Clemson had the air raid stuff with Garrett Riley. Louisville spread out the offense and ran through them. Any insights that Purdue can use when facing the Al Golden defense? I mean, Ohio State, Clemson, and Louisville beat them last year. Ohio State was loaded with elite talent, but it didn't have elite quarterback play. It didn't have offensive line play that was up to their standards. So they needed the last-second touchdown to beat Notre Dame. Notre Dame fought hard in that game, but you saw a good defense, no doubt. You held Ohio State to 17 points. That's still an accomplishment. Notre Dame turned it over a bunch against Louisville, and this probably won't go over well, but Jeff Brom's a really good play caller, and when he's in those underdog roles, he tends to kind of get in his bag as a play caller, and when he finds something that works, he's very NFL-like, where he will just spam that matchup, and he found something he liked in the run game, and it worked. It worked. With Clemson, I really don't remember watching that game at all. I think I was in Ann Arbor that day. But, just looking at box score, Clemson ran the ball well. Sam Hartman completed less than 50% of his passes, and he threw 2 picks. So in all of those games, it was a good defensive effort where Ohio State limited Notre Dame to 14 points, And then Louisville and Clemson forced turnovers. Forced turnovers. There you go. It's that's kind of your key. In terms of offensive stuff, I don't know. I mean, this kind of goes into the next question of, in scouting Notre Dame, what elements are you keeping a close eye on when Notre Dame plays Northern Illinois to prepare for week 3? And it's hard because Northern Illinois is going to be overmatched everywhere on the field. But can you find a secondary matchup you feel good about? Can you find areas of the offensive line where you can put extra pressure on and have some success? You're not going to get anything from the Northern Illinois game that you can't already find, but what weaknesses in Riley Leonard's passing game can you exploit? What can you try to make him do that he's not good at? It's things like that I think you're looking at the most this week. Listener says he wasn't impressed with Notre Dame's offense. What group needs to have the best day on defense to help stall the Irish offense? It's the defensive line. If you can put pressure on the run game and make Notre Dame throw the ball, look, you might get beat by that. Riley Leonard has shown up and down passing skills during his time, but he's shown very high-level running ability. So if you're making Notre Dame put the ball in the air and getting them in third and medium, third and long passing situations, that's all you can ask for. You see what happens then. You play third down, you play third down and see what happens, but that beats letting them run it down your throat, because Notre Dame's going to be content to do that if it can. And then the last question, not a moral victory guy, but is a Purdue cover versus Notre Dame a bit of a win? Let me see the line first. I don't know what it's going to be. My hunch is right around the 14 mark, but we'll see. I mean, yes and no. Like, if you're going into that game saying that a win is the only positive outcome, that's a bit much. But also, I mean, if you're backdoor covering in a game that isn't really that close, I don't know that that's a big moral victory either. A few things I'm watching this weekend as Purdue is on bye. Michigan hosts Texas. It's the game of the week. Does Michigan have a second gear against a big-time opponent? Because it wasn't pretty last week. The quarterback play, the offense as a whole, very big concerns. Interested to see what they look like. Kansas at Illinois. This is a return game of a home and home. The only thing I will say about Illinois' trip to Lawrence last year is that Illinois got blown out on the football field. I'll leave it at that. How much has Illinois grown since then? That game wasn't close. Is Illinois ready to compete? That's under a touchdown spread. That game was a lot more than a touchdown last year. Cy-Hawk game is always a fun one. Iowa State, Iowa. Those two programs hate one another. Is Iowa's offensive improvement like remotely real? Iowa put up 40 last week. It had 6 at halftime, so a lot of second half stuff. We'll see. That's a big one for the Hawks, though. Can Nebraska take care of business in a game it should win? It's a touchdown favorite against Colorado. You know how I feel about the Buffs. It's kind of now or never time for Nebraska. Like, there have been so many of these games over time where Nebraska really should win it at home, and it hasn't. They need to show it. Year 2 of Matt Rule. It's time. And then we have the first Big Ten matchup of the season. Michigan State and Maryland going at it. Purdue plays Michigan State. Purdue doesn't play Maryland. Very unknowns on both of those teams, though. Michigan State, new coach, new roster. Maryland replacing Taulia Tagovailoa after he was there for seemingly forever. That's a big one. Not like in the Big Ten standings or anything, but in kind of determining pecking order of the Big Ten. We'll see what that looks like. Are either of those teams bowl teams, I guess is what I'm asking. That's all I've got for today. Thank you for spending your time with me. I will be back middle of next week to preview the battle for the Shillelagh as Notre Dame returns to Ross-Ade Stadium. Send over your questions on Twitter at BoilersBeyond or email them to me, boilersandbeyondpod@gmail.com. Always love interacting with you all. Be sure to subscribe so that you don't miss a thing. I will talk to you next week. Until then, enjoy week 2.